Welcome back to the 10 Adventures podcast. I'm excited. I'm joined again by Mico, who's been on our podcast as a guest before and also as a host. And today, Miko's going to ask me a bunch of questions about backpacking in the Canadian Rockies. It's probably something that I get asked the most about, living just on the edge of the Canadian Rockies and having spent, over 20 years exploring different trails. So, Miko, welcome back.
Thanks for having me, Richard. I'm kind of excited about this podcast because I feel like we're flipping seats a little bit. I'll be the one who's going to be asking the questions and digging deep into your experiences. And I know there's a lot there. I know you and I have both been living by the Rockies for a long time, but I know you've been through so many areas, and I'm excited to pick your brain a little bit about the Canadian Rockies because I have plans myself to explore it this summer. So I'm pumped. I got a lot of questions for you. I hope you're ready for it.
I am ready, and I love sharing because I just think it's one of the most beautiful places on earth, and I love sharing just this beautiful part of Canada.
Okay, well, very good. So, you don't have to go into that all the detail because we've got a lot of questions. But let me ask you first: what sparked your passion for hiking and camping in the Rockies? And I know it's more than just the views. I think there's other parts about camping and hiking in the Rockies that just keep drawing you year after year.
Yeah, like lots of people, I just grew up and we'd go camping every summer. Back in the olden days, people didn't have a ton of money, so camping was you pay 8 or 9 bucks for your campsite, and you'd go spend your week's holidays doing that. So I just fell in love with that as a kid, and we never did backpacking. We do little easy hikes, but just hanging out by the campfire, reading comic books, trading hockey cards when friends came out. And then as I got older, I went to live abroad and I explored a bunch of other mountain ranges. And then I realized, oh, I actually like doing more than just camping and hiking. And so when I came back to Canada, I just all of a sudden I had these newfound skills and I just started to explore this playground west of Calgary.
What is it about the Rockies, I guess, in particular, that kind of stand out to you as compared to the other mountain landscapes you've traveled to in different parts of the world?
So I think what's really wild is just there's so much nature here. And I assumed like every place had this huge unbroken nature nearby. But it isn't, and so the fact you have kind of like 500 kilometers, or maybe it's more north to south, probably 100 kilometers east to west, which has like 2 roads in it, it it means that you can get away so easily, and when you're backpacking, you're backpacking. You don't see anybody, you see the other 5 or 6 campers who are doing a similar trip from you, but you just have this complete disconnection. Your phones don't work, and you just connect with nature. And there's something that just feels really, really good, unless it's you got a freak snowstorm or a rainstorm. But you just feel great walking all day, and then you come into camp and set up your tent, and you often have this little lake and a beautiful view, and it just feels right as a human for me.
Yeah, personally, I have to agree with you. There's just something about walking into the woods and just disappearing from the rest of life that's so unique. And I love that about the Rockies because there are not a lot of roads to explore every path of it. Like, if you really want to get deep into the Rockies, you have to kind of get on, with your own 2 feet, like into the woods. For my wife and I, Nicole, like we love backcountry camping as well. But we know it's just kind of her and I. So the logistics of going deep into the woods is I would say simpler than what I think you have it, where going in with a family into the Canadian Rockies. Can you talk a little bit about what that experience is like, as opposed to just as opposed to just going by yourself or just with one other partner?
Yeah, so I spent 5 years where it was really hard to get out backpacking. I went out a few times with, friends and, my siblings, but, really with little kids, I couldn't do it, and I see families with, like, carrying kids on their back. Those people are
Yeah.
superhuman. I don't know how they do it. We eventually got it working when our youngest was, I think, 4 or 5, and we just started real slow, so we do, like, 2 or 3 kilometer walks in. Now, our youngest just turned 10, but 2 years ago, we did, like, 20 kilometers with 1,000 meters. Last year, we did 26 kilometers, I think, with 1,300 meters, or, 20, maybe it's 23 kilometers. I can't remember the exact numbers, but, really, really big days. And part of it's just kids, kind of don't know what they don't know. And so we just gradually build them up. And then also just structuring the day so they can be successful. So, like, we stop every 45 minutes for water and we take little candies for them, which they don't get at home, which they love. We get them talked out at the start, let them just talk whatever they want. And when they start flagging, we'll put Harry Potter on, or Lord of the Rings, or Diary of a Wimpy Kid. And that'll keep them going because, they don't, they're listening to the podcast or the audiobook. And, yeah, that just makes it go really well. And then what I love is when we get to camp, there's no distractions. The kids just love it, and we have this time where we're all together, often, all of us squished into one four-person tent. And, yeah, it's just the memories that I know I'm gonna smile about, for decades to come.
Yeah, I can imagine that the conversations you have with your kids while you're on the trail are just a little bit different than the ones you have on the drive, to and from school or to any other kind of activities that they have. So I'm sure it's a whole other level. Just speaking from my own experience and the conversations that I have with friends or my wife on the trail, it's just unparalleled. And I mean, that's what keeps drawing me to the Rockies every year. I think it sounds very similar to you. I've got some questions and topics here I do want to talk about because I think for anybody who's listening, I would love to be able to try to get out as much information as we can in case whoever's listening is also planning their own trip to the Rockies. So we're going to be drawing on your experience, Richard. So I hope you're ready to give some tips because I got a
I
couple
am
more
ready, yeah.
specific questions. Okay. So my first question, Richard, is what do you think what is the best times in the year to go backpacking in the Canadian Rockies?
Yeah, so every year I'll see on, Facebook groups, or I'll get messages, or at 10 Adventures we'll have customers asking, "Oh, I wanna go backpacking in May or June or October." And, really backpacking is kind of a July, August, the first little bit of September, maybe the end of June. Those are the times that it's good, and the reason is a lot of the backpacking trails, like the great ones, go up high. You go up, to these high alpine valleys that are snowbound well into the year. For example, last year, we did the rock wall and the skyline, and both of those had substantial snow, and we did them on, like, the 10th or 12th of June or of July, and there was still, like, it was like, "Oh, wow, if we'd gone a week earlier, we couldn't have done it." And so the danger you have in starting in June is you just might have to deal with snow, and, it's tough. Like, if you're backpacking, you got a heavy pack, you're dealing with snow, um, if you can still see the trail, it's maybe not dangerous, but in some cases, you can't even, the snow covers the trail, in which case, how do you know where to go? So, um, I normally will book something at, kind of like the last week in June or the second last week in June, knowing I may not do that. And then in September, you get these freezes, and you get early snow as well, where I book those and think, I may not be able to do these because the weather just doesn't cooperate.
Yeah, yeah, I agree with that, and I recall a very interesting backpacking experience that I had in mid June, and I kind of foolishly thought that by mid June I think I could probably couldn't go anywhere, and it was the pass Gwyn's Pass between Lillian Lake and Ribbon Falls was completely snowed over. We had to we had to turn around and basically cut the camping trip short because I thought maybe a little bit of snow is not too bad. It's June, it's pretty much summer, but the Canadian Rockies really run their own schedule.
Yeah, and it sucks to camp. Like, I have set up a tent on snow, but I don't enjoy it. I don't carry a shovel to move it away. If there's a bit of snow, you can move
Yeah.
it, but if you put your tent on snow, you know, over the night, there's a good chance you might melt some of it, so your tent gets a bit wet. Everything gets wet. You can never really stay warm. Even if there's no snow, like up high, it can go down to like -5, -10 at night, and so you have these really cold nights. So if you're from around here and you got all the gear, it's not too bad. But if you're just flying into the Rockies to do a backpacking trip, you're more likely to be disappointed in June and September.
How do you think somebody decides which trail to go on? I know not everybody has same bank of knowledge that you have or I have about all the trails available to them in the Canadian Rockies. So what kind of resources would you have to look through to find out what the best trail is for you?
Yeah, so when I first launched 10 Adventures, one of the first things I did is I shared all my favorite hiking and backpacking trails. So we still have those on the website. So you can go and search backpacking routes in Jasper or in Banff National Park or the Kananaskis and just see what the different trails are. But in reality, your flexibility on trails is not super high. And the issue is for the Parks Canada routes, the way you reserve is essentially reservations open at a certain time, and it's a lottery what place in line you get. So they just happened here at the end of January, I think, and I was like number 17,000 in line. So everything was sold out by the time I got on. And so looked around, so, okay, what's available? Oh, I wouldn't mind going back to this lake, or I wouldn't mind doing this trip. But I'm not doing a bunch of backpacking in the Rockies this year because I was like near the end. I think it went up to 33,000. I heard this year. But if you're not kind of in the first, probably 2 to 5,000, you're probably not gonna get the best routes. There are some good routes, and I think we're gonna talk about them later in terms of some of the classics or some of the good beginner ones, but, um, kind of the truth is almost every route is pretty good. You get off the main drag, you're kind of in the back country,
Yeah.
and you have these beautiful experiences. I like ones that get higher that are around lakes. I also like ones there aren't many that have fire pits because there's nothing better than getting a fire going. That used to be 20 years ago, it was pretty common. Now it's very uncommon. There's, very few that still allow fires, but those are two things that are really nice if you can find them. Also, when you're making your reservations on the Parks Canada site, you can actually see all the different campsites. So you can kind of plan your trip on Parks Canada. You can open up the little, you can click to see the campsites and they give you a little description. The ones I would avoid are some are, they say, "Oh, this one is infrequently used," or they kinda give that type of indication. Those can often be overgrown as well. And so, and also it's sometimes a bit unnerving to be the only, like, tent at a backcountry campground. So some of the ones where they say, "Oh, this is remote or not often used," I might not use those as my first choice for camping.
Yeah, yeah, I can agree with that. Sometimes it's you spend a whole day hiking and then you get to a place and you're by yourself and sometimes it's not necessarily the best feeling to say, okay, well, I guess it's just me in the darkness tonight and the silence.
Exactly. Yeah,
uh
exactly.
do you have any recommendations for first time like campsites for first time visitors or beginner friendly trails?
Yeah, so I'll share a few, and so what people find when they move to backpacking is going up and going down, like gaining and losing elevation is what really tires them out. And so what you wanna do if you're new to this is look at ways that you can reduce how much up and down you have. Distance is still tough, but going on flatter ground isn't too bad. And so one of the ones I like is there's one called Galatee and Kananaskis. That was the one you went to, or it's actually Lillian Lake, I think is where the
That's right.
campground is.
Yeah.
And that was one I used to do when I first started doing this. That was like one of my weekend favorites. You'd go out on a Friday and you could kind of get into the site in about 2 hours. And then the route up, you kind of leave your campsite and you just climb up to Gwyn's Pass and upper and lower Galatea Lakes. And that was just phenomenal. Another good one is Yoho Lake, and so you can access this. It's best accessed from a place called Takaka Falls, and I think it gains about 400 meters over maybe 4 or 5 kilometers. So it's a pretty stiff uphill, but it's just a beautiful, beautiful location. And once you're there, like you're right on this lake, you have great views. And the next day you can hike out along the ice line, which is one of the most beautiful hikes in all of the Canadian Rockies. And so that's a good one to do, although that first day you're gonna sweat like a pig getting up.
Yeah, I'll also add, Richard, that if anybody's looking at that route, I've done that myself, and what I like about it is you could actually also, if I'm thinking of the same one, you could do I think it's a loop, right? And I think you can kind of go, clockwise or counterclockwise. Just as a tip for anybody who's making reservations, if the dates don't line up, maybe try looking the other way because you still kind of get the same views. You just gonna go a different direction. Although I think there's a part of that called the whaleback, which is a very steep part of the trail that you can take as a little shortcut and Yeah, sometimes it's preferable to go uphill than downhill, depending on how you are with your knees.
Yeah, we actually that was the first 1,000-meter day my kids did, was the whaleback, and we did that route, and, we went along, the ice line, then went down to, Stanley Mitchell Hut in the Little Yoho Valley, and then next they went up Whaleback, and that's a great kinda 3 to 5-day trip if you want. It's just beautiful there. Um, but yeah, Yoho Lake is one if you just wanna try out for one night, it's kinda in and out, that isn't too bad. Another good one is Howard Douglas Lake, so this is one people often do when they're hiking to Assiniboine. What's nice is you can take the Sunshine Gondola to do most of the elevation gain, and then it's like a 6 or 7 kilometer walk. I think you have a couple 100 meters, and I
Oh,
just
I
find
love
that
that.
area, it's just beautiful, but the gondola used to be like 30 or $40. Now I think it's like $80. So it's getting more expensive, but if you just wanna get out, that's a really beautiful area. 2 other good ones, Lake Minnewanka. You can just camp right on the edge of this lake, and there's sites, I think it's 7, 10, 12, 16 kilometers along. And that was when my wife and I were dating. That was our little Friday, Friday night, Saturday night date. We'd go out there with a bottle of wine and we'd set up, and then you'd look out over the lake as the sun set. And it didn't used to be super popular as well, so, like, often we'd be, like, the only people in camp. Now the only issue now is there's a lot of ticks there, so the last 2 times I've been out there, I've had ticks on me. I haven't had ticks anywhere else in my life except for on Lake Minnewanka. I think it's LM11, the campsite at 11 kilometers. So that's the only negative about that one, but yeah, just drinking wine and looking out at the lake is pretty special.
Yeah, those are great. That sounds like some great, first time, and 100th time, it sounds like, if, if you're going there for your for a date. So, thanks for sharing that. So, I've heard now some of the first time visitor trails that are good for beginners. Can you tell me a little bit more about the popular hikes in the Canadian Rockies? And I know there are many of them, and I think I'm also eager to hear myself in case there's some here that I haven't done myself.
Yeah, so this is kind of everyone has their own list. This is what I kind of think are the classics where you kind of hear again and again, people want to do these. These are the ones that, from what I've seen, sell out all the time. I don't think these are always the best. They're all really good. But there's some ones that not many people do that I think are more spectacular, but these are kind of the classics that I think are great. I'll go from north to south. In Jasper National Park, there's a route called the Skyline. You start at Moline Lake. I always say it wrong, which is this beautiful lake surrounded by this big mountain valley. You climb up and you basically go above tree line for 3 days, and you just have these stupendous views. And the terrain's like nothing I've really hiked in the Canadian Rockies. You have really nice campsites, and you just yeah, these views are just spectacular, and you end up I believe it's called the Astoria Trailhead. It's like kinda like a 10-minute drive outside of, Jasper, and so it's nice, you can park your car at that trailhead. There's a shuttle service that'll take you to the lake, so you kinda end up you get to do a linear hike and end up at your car. You don't have to worry about getting 2 cars up there. And so that's a really popular one. Uh, I think a big reason we don't have many linear hikes. Most routes, they're a circle that you come back or it's an out and back. And so that one
Yeah.
is really special. I don't believe it was impacted by the wildfires last year. In fact, it was 2 days before Jasper was closed down by wildfires. I remember us looking out and thinking, all this smoke, what happens if there's a wildfire here? And then we got home and the next day, all of a sudden, the wildfires hit Jasper.
I think there's a whole podcast for that story if if you're out there 2 days later.
Well, it was wild because there's still a lot of snow there too. So is, Eve is a really big snow year, and even with all the snow, the wildfires just move quickly. So I think that's, probably the most famous one in Jasper, but Jasper has a lot of great trails, and I don't know what was impacted by the fires, so I don't want to recommend too many. My understanding is that one has not been affected, so I'll suggest that one. Moving south to Banff National Park, this has 3 classics, although, there's the Icefield Parkway alone has, 4 or 5 great ones as well. I'll start with the Skokie Loop, and so Skokie is named after Skokie Lodge, or maybe Skokie Lodge is named after the Skokie Valley, I'm not sure, but it's accessed the backside of, the Lake Louise ski hill, and it is just some of the most beautiful terrain. you'll ever see. You hike out past Temple Lodge, which is one of the lodges on the ski hill. You go over Boulder Pass, you come down to Ptarmigan Lake, you continue on to Baker Lake, which I think is one of my favorite views in the entire Rockies. Some people just go out and back, and that's when we do with the kids. Or you can do a loop around and go via Merlin Meadows and Red Deer Lakes. And it's just a beautiful, beautiful route. It is very buggy. It's one of those ones where I've never been there where I'm not, we wear mosquito nets and take a ton of bug spray, but it is just achingly beautiful. It's also one you can do, excuse me, it's also one you can do if you're new to backpacking because there is a halfway um, campground called Hidden Lake, which is actually the campground's not very nice, but Hidden Lake, if you hike up to, is really nice. But the Skokie backpacking is just, a pure classic. And Skokie Lodge is beautiful to visit as well. You could actually stay there. It's a luxury backcountry lodge, about $300 a night. It's hard to get reservations, but definitely worth it. The next one, it's now called the Banff Highline, I think, is what I've seen it mentioned at. And this one starts, you can start it on the 93 South Highway, which is the highway that goes to Radium. And you basically hike up and over past a bunch of beautiful lakes, and you end up at Sunshine Village. The other way is you start at Sunshine Village and you hike up. You go past places like Egypt Lake, which is beautiful. Faro Lakes. You can go down by oh, sorry. Then you go to Shadow Lake and Vista Lake. And so this just gets you some really, really big scenery, beautiful lakes, and is just a classic. There's also a luxury backcountry lodge at Shadow Lake. It used to be a luxury backcountry lodge where it was hundreds of dollars per person a night. The Alpine Club of Canada bought it, and now you can go there and you can get a cabin for about $300. So if there's four of you, it's only $75 for your own private cabin in the middle of nowhere. That's another classic that's really hard to get availability for. The hard part there is really getting a space at Egypt Lake. That just sells out, almost immediately. And then the third trip is a hike from Lake Louise to Banff called the Sawback. And so this takes in part of the Skokie Trail. You start at Lake Louise, go past Baker Lake, and then it's just achingly beautiful over these mountain passes. The first 3 days are just out of this world. The last day and a half is you kind of in the trees. It's not as beautiful. But it's kind of fun to say, oh, I walked from Lake Louise to Banff in the backcountry. And so those are kind of three of the great ones in Banff that, for my money are all just really spectacular ones.
Yeah, I've done a few of those myself, and just unbelievable views. I think the Skokie Trail there in Banff. I think that's one of the one of those moments where you are looking into the landscape and you think to yourself, am I still on Earth? Because the lakes are incredible, the mountains are poking up from the horizon, and you just have nothing but serene nature. I think we went there. I think it was in August, and the wildflowers were blooming, and we actually even had a couple of porcupines visit our campsite there in Baker Lake. So that is something to watch out for if you're in that area. But unreal views, and that's one that I could do 100 times. And you said it yourself. There's many places you can go, so you could revisit that trail and try out a couple different ones and create a brand new backpacking experience.
Yeah, and Skokie as well, that's an epic one in autumn where the larches turn this yellow. If you can go there and if you get the right weather, it's just spectacular. Moving west to Yoho National Park, it has two great ones. So the first one we talked about is this Yoho Valley, where you go up to Yoho Lake and then you go along the ice line down to the Stanley Mitchell Hut, which is a 100-year-old log cabin run by the Alpine Club of Canada. Then you can either exit from there and just make your way back, or you can go for Whaleback, which is not super heavily trafficked. You get up to this beautiful viewpoint, and then you go to Twin Falls, down to the Twin Falls Chalet, which is currently closed, but every year I hear it's going to reopen. I used to be able to get lunch there from a legend of the Canadian backcountry called Fran, and then you come out past Laughing Falls, and it's just really beautiful. It's really diverse. In Iceland, you're seeing all of this these glaciers, receding glaciers above you. You've got beautiful waterfalls. So that one's really great. That one actually is sometimes it doesn't get booked up as quickly as the others. So that's one if you're like, number 4,000 in line, you can probably still find that, midweek in the summer, and it's wonderful. The next one is probably the most classic, and it's not really a backpacking trip, but it kind of is. It's Lake O'Hara. So, one of the most beautiful places in the world. You can only get in there if you stay at there's a luxury lodge called Lake O'Hara Lodge, which, I think it's about $500 per person a night for the cabins there in summer. You can stay in the lodge for a bit less, but, it is just this area that is heavily restricted to reduce the impact on the area. I think they have one bus that goes up with about 60 people who wanna do a day hike, and then they have, 30, I think, campsites there where you get in on the bus as well, and you basically just set up your tent and you can do day hikes every day. So it's kinda like the backcountry, but it's kinda not because you didn't have to carry everything in. And, in autumn with the fall colors, it's beautiful. In summer, it's beautiful. You just have these incredible views as you go up, and you can kinda hike in every direction to a bunch of these plateaus and lakes. And that's, again and again, I hear people saying, "Oh, I wanna go to Lake O'Hara." And Lake O'Hara is if you're not in the first kind of 500 when it opens, you're not gonna get it. Ironically, a lot of people cancel it. I think a lot of people get it from overseas, and so if you check back every day, I know a lot of people, they're like, "Oh, I just got Lake O'Hara for Friday." I'm like, "What?" I'm like, "Yeah, I went in at 8 o'clock and there was an opening." So, uh, it seems to be the one I hear most that people get cancellations. I think as well, maybe you pay a bit more, so people wanna get their money back, so you get your bus transportation back. So maybe it's like if you cancel, might get $100 back versus, 30 or $40 for a regular campsite. But yeah, those are kind of the 2 classics in the Yoho area. So just south of Yoho National Park is a park called Kootenai National Park. And Kootenai doesn't have a ton of backpacking, but what it does have is one of the most spectacular routes. It's called the Rock Wall. It's definitely one of the hardest ones to book because it is a linear trail and there really aren't many options on it. And what makes it special, it's called the Rock Wall because if you're walking the kind of the standard route, you've got this wall of rock on your left the entire way. And so I did it last year with my family. We did it in I think the first week of July. There was a ton of snow to deal with, but you start at Flow Lake, which is I think it's about half an hour drive on the 93 South Highway from kind of from a junction in between Banff and Lake Louise. And that first day is just out of this world. You get up to this beautiful, beautiful lake that has ice coming into it. It's a tough walk in. You walk through a former forest fire burn, so you have incredible views all along the little eating area. You're on this little kind of like peninsula with the view of the lake and ice all around. And the next day you go up over a pass, and that's kind of what you do every day. You go up over a pass and come down. The passes all have spectacular views. You look back onto these stunning lakes, and it just is one of the most beautiful routes I've done. You sleep roughly, I think it's around between 1,600 and 2,000 meters. So you're not as high as some places, but you're still, still fairly high. You kind of sleep where the trees are. And it is just a beautiful trip. We did it in 5 days. You could probably do it. I know people that do it in 2 days that are super athletes. If you're in good shape, you could probably do it in 3 days. Um, but yeah, that's just one of just these epic, epic trails that I've been trying for 5 years to get that, and luckily last year I got it early, so I was able to get it. But, only a handful, hundreds of people are able to do it every year because it's just this series like 5 or 6 campsites on this one little route. And then kind of if we go south, there's Kananaskis, which is a series of provincial parks. It has lots of great hikes. Um, I don't they're all really good. I don't know if any of them are kind of on the legendary status of the ones I've mentioned, but we've had tons of great hiking. Maybe there's the elbow the elbow loop is a great early season one, but it's not as spectacular as the ones I've spoken about. Going up to the Point Campground on Kananaskis Lakes, That's a really great beginner trail. It's fairly flat. Just an unbelievable view, and you're in this little, like, peninsula with this campground in the trees, and that's not a tough camp trip. You can go beyond there to turn it into a 4 or 5-day trip, but that campsite is one of my favorites. But I'd say kind of the other classic that goes kinda south of Banff National Park would be the backpack down to Assiniboine National Park, and it is just out of this world. The backpack starts at Sunshine Village, you go past Howard Douglas Lake, um, and then you just start making your way to Mount Assiniboine. And, the views of Mount Assiniboine from Lake Magog in front are just spectacular. You go out via Assiniboine Pass, and then you come into Kananaskis, Provincial Parks, and then you can pick up a car there. The hard part about doing Assiniboine is, 1, it's hard to get reservations. You have to get some reservations using Banff National Parks Canada's reservation systems. Then you have to go into the BC Parks reservation system to get the Assiniboine reservations, and then you gotta go into, uh, Kananaskis. If you want to stay in Kananaskis, you'd have to get a, reservation there. Actually, let me change the end. And then you have to go back onto Banff National Park if you wanna split up your journey out. But it is just phenomenal. The views from, the Nublet looking down at Mount Assiniboine, I'm sure if people just Google it, you'll look at it, you'll say, "Oh, I've seen that photo." Assiniboine's a bit like the Matterhorn, and, it's beautiful. There's also a incredible backcountry lodge there called, Mount Assiniboine Lodge. It's not as expensive as Lake O'Hara Lodge, but basically, you can't get a reservation there. They open reservations each year to past guests first, and what happens are people go out there every year. If you go out the 2nd week in July, you go there year after year after year after year, so it's really, really hard to ever get a space staying there. I've stayed there in winter. It's a great family that runs it. They have little cabins that have the most incredible views. Um, if you get a chance, Assiniboine would be, for me, probably the most spectacular, because I think the view of Assiniboine from the surrounding peaks is just unbeaten in the Canadian Rockies.
Assiniboine is definitely on our list as well. It's a place that I haven't visited yet. I've been to many other places that you've mentioned, but Assiniboine, you're just really, you're really dangling that in front of me that I gotta be better at planning my trips in advance because that is definitely one of those bucket list trips that I need to work on. And yeah, I think what really is daunting to people is just the booking of it because it is a little bit tough when you're working with multiple systems trying to line up days and the correct stay night after night. So but yeah, but it sounds like it's worth it.
One thing that, a lot of people, especially people who aren't from Western Canada, is at 10 Adventures, we have a selection of these backpacking trips that you can book. They're guided by a professional guide, so you have someone who is an expert in this, like, their job is guiding people, and they get all the reservations. And so what makes this really nice is, if you don't wanna have the hassle of trying to figure this all out, or you just want someone there to kinda help you, like, in July, there can be snow. In August, it used to be for about 10 years, it seemed the last week in August, we always got a massive, like, 30 centimeter or a foot of snow. Um, it's not that expensive to just book a guided trip, and you can do this with a group of other people and a guide, and then you don't have any of the stress of, "Where should I sleep each night?" Where do I go when I get to the crossroads and there's 4 different ways, or how should I structure my trip? I think I'm always amazed, what I can do hiking when I go backpacking with my family. I gotta really make sure, okay, don't think of this as Richard hiking, think of this, how can we backpack? And, you just can't go as far, and so having it all planned for you, yeah, it costs more, but, it makes it really easy to get to some of these trips that, you don't wanna book on your own.
Yeah, I think I mean, me in particular, like I do love getting, excited and planning a trip, but sometimes I just want it, done for me and I don't have to worry about it. And I could worry more about what's inside my pack and will I survive 5 days of walking? I could see how that would be definitely alluring for many people. Richard, we've heard a lot of the popular trails, but I know you've probably got a few lesser known trails in your back pocket. I'm hoping you can share a couple with us, because again, I'm going to add this to my list for the summer.
So you know what, Miko? When I first launched 10 Adventures, I had a couple of these great backcountry campsites that I could kind of get any day of the week. They were never that busy, and so I put them on 10 Adventures. And what happened was I can't get these campsites anymore.
Can't basically
So
say goodbye to them.
yeah, so one of them is Howard Douglas Lake. That was a classic for me that I always go in. There's one called Elbow Lake, which Elbow Lake's really well known. I didn't mention it, but it's a great. But I used to be able to go there all the time, and so I have a couple places. Um, but those are, I tell people in person and say, "Don't tell people," because, like, again, I was number 17,000, wherever I was in line this year. I got the one site I love doing, so, um, there was nothing left, and I got that. I think one thing people always, ask about is, "Oh, I don't wanna go where it's busy. I wanna go where it's quiet," and the one thing about backpacking in the Rockies is the only way to get there is by foot. And so as soon as you leave the day hike crowds away, the only people you're gonna see is the, other people who have hiked. And so that's what makes it really, really special, um, is that it really is kind of like a solitary existence. When you start in the morning, there's the early birds and the late risers. And so often, like, it's not like, in the Alps or a Camino where you have hundreds of people starting at the same time. Often, in fact, it's very rare that you'll even start at the same time. So you're kind of like have the days with just you and who you're hiking with, which makes it real special.
Yeah, I agree. I gotta agree with that. As soon as you as soon as you've been hiking for maybe 4 or 5 hours, all the day hikers that are just doing like an out and back, they're turning around at that point, and then you basically have the trail to yourself in the afternoon if if you keep on going. So the crowd does thin out, even those popular ones. It might be a little bit busier at the campsite, but sometimes, after a full day of hiking or full few days of hiking, it's not not a bad thing to just know there's other people around there. And obviously you could also chat with those people, and they often have some really great stories, and just like-minded people who love the outdoors, and that's always nice to find them on the trail as well. Or you can just stick to by yourself. There's definitely nothing wrong with just enjoying the experience solo. But yeah, I think that is the magic of the Rockies. You can have it kind of any way you like, as long as it's in nature.
Yeah, definitely. It's a real special place. I will say one thing. If there are people who are super interested and you want to get a recommendation, I don't know if there's still availability now, but send a message in. Go to the 10 Adventures contact us page and say, hey, can I get a couple ideas for a couple places to check out? And I'll share it on a one-on-one basis, a couple of these places. So yeah, so I won't withhold this gold, um, but I'll make it hard to access.
Do you have any recommendations for underrated place that you think that more people should be looking at?
Yeah, so I think what's really special is, I mentioned the kind of the classics, but if you kind of go on any part of the Parks Canada, maps in the Canadian Rockies, there's just so much beauty everywhere. And um, there's only one place where I think, hey, this isn't a very good backpack that I've done. And it's mostly because you're just in the valley bottom and there's kind of an old fire road there. Even that, it's not bad. It's still nice. It's better than sitting at home. That's for sure. But, like a lot of things in tourism right now, everyone's focused on what's the best. And I feel like when you go to the Canadian Rockies, and this is similar when I'm in the Alps or in the Andes, it's kind of all really good. And we're dealing with like, oh, this one's a 99% exceptional, and that one's a 98.2. And so I think if you just look at a map, if you're getting up, above tree line during the day, if you're getting up to like lakes ringed with mountains, you're gonna have a good time. I think the place I didn't talk about. So Kananaskis has some really great places to explore. It gets sold out pretty quickly, but not as quickly as Parks Canada. And then if you go south of the Kananaskis down to Waterton, those areas are not nearly as discovered. And so there is some good stuff there. The trick is it's pretty windy. It's not as developed. But if you're willing to be a bit more ambitious, you can check those out. And then if you really want to do something great, check out the Columbia Valley. So you go down to where Radium Gold and Invermere is, and you go west from there. There's some exceptional backpacking there. And a lot of it is you don't need to make reservations. It's just kind of like wild camping. So maybe those would be my suggestions. But honestly, I never hear people saying they have bad, oh, I was in Banff, I had a bad trip. Everyone says, holy crow, how I can't believe this place exists. So I just urge people to, come on out and, explore this beautiful part of the world.
Well, Richard, I feel like I've got 1,000 names and 1,000 different ideas now for trails. It's been a really good conversation, but I realize we've also been talking a lot about the Canadian Rockies, and time is just flying. What I also wanted to talk about was, a little bit about safety and a little bit about the backpacking gear, because I think that's a question that a lot of people have when they start when they start planning their trip to the Rockies, is what is it exactly that you need to take, what you shouldn't take. But I think we should plan for another get together in a couple weeks here to talk about a more generic look at backpacking.
Yeah, I'd love that, Mico. And it's been fun, as we've been talking, I just get these flashes of, images of, us as a family walking these beautiful places. So it's been super fun for me just to rekindle all these great memories. And yeah, I'd love to share, what I've learned in 25 years. Some of the things I wish I knew 25 years ago. I made it so hard on myself when I first did this. And yeah, if you make it easy, backpacking is a lot more fun if you have just a little bit of insight.
And once again, where can I find those guides for all the trails that we've been talking about?
Yeah, so if you go on to 10adventures.com, in the nav, there's something that says trail guides. Click on that and then click Canada and Alberta, and you'll see all the options that are there. And again, if you want a recommendation, you want some suggestions, reach out to our contact us and check out also the tours we have, because there's some incredible backpacking tours. Most of the trips I've discussed um, are available on 10 Adventures. And like I said, for the Rockwall, a lot of these trips, I spent years trying to get reservations. If you're just coming to this area, for your holiday and you just want to do a great one, don't leave it a chance on maybe getting a reservation. Just get it organized through a guide that has everything prepared for you. You can even rent some of the gear from them and make it go super easy.
Okay, well, that's great, Richard. The weather looks like it's warming up a little bit, although we do have a fresh dusting, but it's probably not going to stop me from looking at the website and seeing what campsites I can pick up this summer already.
Wicked. And thanks, Miko, for coming on and hosting this. It's kind of fun to be on the other side of the camera. And again, thanks everyone for listening to this episode of the 10 Adventures podcast. We're going to do a series of kind of Q&As here with Miko for answering all the common questions we get at 10 Adventures around my neck of the woods and Miko's neck of the woods here for the next 6 months as well, here in the Canadian Rockies. So I hope everyone enjoys this, and we'll be back next week with some more epic adventures. Start planning your own adventure by visiting us at 10adventures.com and listen to other episodes of the 10 Adventures podcast on Amazon Music, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or anywhere else you find your podcasts.